Welcome to The Author Next Door, where hosts Angela Haas and Cassie Newell chat about the wild world of writing and publishing. Join them for weekly episodes and special monthly guests. Pull up a chair. The conversation starts now. Welcome to episode 22. I'm Angela Haas, and I'm here with my co-host, Cassie Newell. And this month, we're talking all about how to find your industry professionals. This episode, we're talking to Patrick O'Donnell about finding professionals that can help you with research, specifically when writing thriller, police procedurals, and crime novels. Patrick O'Donnell is proof that there is life after retirement. He was a City of Milwaukee police sergeant with 25 years of street experience, where he supervised various special units and investigated major felonies. He's the author of 10 books, including his newest thriller, The Good Caller, which I have read, and it's awesome. He hosts the popular Cops and Writers podcast and founded and runs an 8,300 member Facebook group for crime writers. He has also hosted true crime television documentaries and has consulted with crime writers for their books and screenplays. O'Donnell lives in Wisconsin, where he enjoys working out, riding his Harley, and spending time with family. Welcome, Patrick. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. This is great. Like I said before, off camera, I've been listening to this podcast and it's really good. You guys have something really good going, and I really hope that you keep pushing because you really have actionable steps that are incredibly helpful for authors. You know, like you mentioned, I've written 10 books. I'm working on number 11 right now. And I listened to your last one about different tools, etc. And then there was another one with the second book. I forget who your guest was on that one.
Yeah.
The second book in a series.
Yep.
And that's what I'm doing right now. I'm writing the second book in The Good Caller, and I'm just like, this is perfect. This is so cool. You know, and she had some really good advice. So good on you. Keep going.
Well, people who aren't seeing us, Angela and I are blushing like all shades of pink right now. Thank you so much.
Well, there is so much to unpack with this episode too, but what I think listeners would be interested to know, take us through briefly your career in law enforcement and then switching to helping authors, writing your own books. What led you to that? What led you to want to help authors the way that you do?
Well, I guess, you know, my background in law enforcement was in the city of Milwaukee. I'm a Chicago boy. I was born in Chicago. I was there till I was a freshman in high school. Then my family up and moved to rural Wisconsin. So I was a complete fish out of water. You know, we wound up in a town of like less than 10,000 people from Chicago, and I'm a teenager. And the place, it didn't even have a McDonald's. I'm like, how am I going to survive? This is ridiculous. You know, there was actual dirt roads. I've never seen a dirt road before. And I'm like, oh my God, what did you do to us, Dad? You know, I couldn't sleep at night because it was so quiet. He moved us out into the country, and I'm just like, this is ridiculous. I literally cannot sleep. Yeah. So, yeah, but I do have very fond childhood memories of being in Chicago and seeing the Chicago police cars, you know, we were on a busy street, you know, the flashing blue lights. And when I was probably about 11 or 12, the police did a raid on our neighbor's house. They served a search warrant. They broke down the door.
Wow.
There was guys in our backyard wearing full tack gear with machine guns and shotguns, and my eyes were like saucers. I'm like, this is so cool. Oh my gosh. You know, they're breaking the door down and stuff. And I'm like, this is the coolest stuff ever. You know, and I'm watching, you know, all the TV shows like SWAT and Chips and Starsky and Hutch and all that good stuff from that era. So I always had the bug. And, you know, I went to college at University of Wisconsin Whitewater. I started as a music major, actually. I was going to be a band director.
Wow.
And I worked my way through college. I worked a full-time job while I was going to school full-time. And music and that just did not match at all. So I wound up shifting to sociology with a minor in criminal justice, interned with the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Department, and I was hooked. You know, I did a summer internship, and I'm like, this is the coolest job. I would do this, like, I would volunteer to do this. This is so cool. You know, wow, I can't believe this stuff is happening. And, you know, I finish up college And it took a while to get on. I was 30 years old. I was on a waiting list for 4 years. And
Wow.
I was 30 years old when I got on. In the meantime, I'm selling cars, I'm bartending, I'm a restaurant manager, just doing what I had to do to pay the rent. Then I got on the job and I thought I died and went to heaven. Oh my God. This is the first job I ever had that was 5 days in a row. I had 2 days off in a row. I'm like, I've never experienced that before. If I work overtime, I get paid for it. I had good benefits. I'm like, wow. The only tough part was the shift work. Yeah, I was a vampire for 17 years. I worked nights for 17. And I worked all over the city. After being a cop for about 6-7 years, I promoted to sergeant. And I stayed at sergeant until I retired after 25 years. And I spent the entirety of my career on the street as a sergeant.
Wow.
It's kind of like Hill Street Blues, where, it starts out with roll call and, you get everybody ready for their shift and then boom, out they go. And as a street sergeant, I was in charge of the coppers on the street. So I went to every major crime scene. Anything big happened, I had to respond to it. So every night was something different, which I absolutely loved. I've never had an office job in my life. And I absolutely loved it. Yes, there were some really hard times and down times, and you saw stuff that no humans should have to see. So I knew that, okay, 25 years, I'm popping smoke. I'm out of there. Not because I hated it, nothing like that, but it was time. And police work is a young guy's game. It ain't an old guy's game like me. I was 55 years old, and it chews you up, especially if you've been on the street the entire time. My hat is off to everybody that's doing their job, because it takes a toll both physically and emotionally on you. And I think 25 or 20 years is more than enough. So it was time to go. So I was thinking to myself, it's like, I'm a huge fan of the saying, dig the well before you're thirsty. So I knew,
I love that.
I saw it on the horizon. That's one thing with that type of job, is that it's coming. You don't have to retire at 25, but it's the most beneficial for a number of reasons. And I didn't want to do an inside job, and I'm like, that just wasn't me. I wanted to be on the street. So it's like, if I couldn't be on the street, I'm not going to do the job. I'm thinking to myself, well, what am I good at? I don't want to sell cars again. I don't want to be a restaurant manager again. And I'm still fairly young. I was 55. So I'm thinking to myself, okay. So I sold cars in my former life before I was a cop, and I continued to help people buy cars. Friends, relatives. It's like, hey, Pat, I'm going to buy a car today. Could you please come with me? I don't want to do this. I don't want to do it alone, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, sure. So, I'd get a dinner out of it, or a drink, or thank you, or whatever. It didn't matter. So somebody that knew a lot more about this kind of stuff is like, you should really write a book about how to buy a car. And I'm like, I'm not an author. And I was just like, yeah, I guess so. So I wrote, it was more or less a glorified PDF. And I had some help. It wasn't edited all that well. I wrote it under a pen name because I would have to get permission from the chief. And I know the answer would have been no. So I'm just like, all right. So I just did it under the radar, and it actually sold a few copies. I was just like, wow, that's kind of crazy. At first, a friend of a friend is like, hey, I got this friend that she's got a big time agent in New York. I gave her your manuscript. She loves it. She's going to pitch it for you. I'm like, wow.
Nice.
So I'm thinking to myself, hey, I'm going to be rolling in dough. I'm going to be driving a Mercedes tomorrow, or a Lexus. And everything's going to be honky dory, and everything's going great. And then the night before she leaves, they get into a fight. And I called her and I said, hey, I hope this doesn't interfere with our professional relationship, et cetera. And she said, no, I already threw that PDF. I already threw your manuscript in the garbage. If you're a friend of him, you're no friend of mine. And I'm like,
ouch.
So I started listening to podcasts. It was the Rocking Publishing. Who was that? There's some old ones. There's Johnny, Sean, and Dave. There's the Self-Publishing Podcast.
Yeah, I love them.
Brian Cohn, he's still going. It was him and Jim Kukrow.
Yeah.
I'm good friends with Brian. Great guy. I can't say enough good things about him. So I was just Joanna Penn, the creative pen, and I'm just like, you can do this thing called self-publishing. Wow, I didn't know that was a thing. And I was like, so I threw it up on Amazon, and it actually started selling. So I told a buddy of mine about it that was another sergeant, and he was an inside cat. He liked working inside. He was working on his PhD. So he was doing his dissertation, and he was just so sick of writing that he wrote this post-apocalyptic book. And it wasn't, the story was good, but the cover was horrible. There was a ton of spelling and grammar mistakes, but he made like 10 grand in 1 year off this book.
Nice.
And my eyes popped out of my, he's showing me this, and I'm like, well, I'm going to write a post-apocalyptic book then, and mine didn't, no, it did okay. It didn't do great. And then I'm like, well, whatever. But I started going to conferences.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. So I became good friends with Craig Martell from 20 Books to 50K.
Oh, yeah.
So I was at the first 20 Books to 50K in Vegas. That was in 2017.
Wow.
And by 2018, I was giving presentations. I had panels, exactly what we're doing right now. And, you know, it gave me an opportunity to know people that were really plugged into this and were very successful. And I saw what was possible. So before I know it, you know, I think it was Brian Cohen came up to me and said, you should write a book about police procedurals, you know, for authors. And I'm like, okay, I think I will. So I did, and they did very well. Then I started a podcast and a Facebook group just to plug the books, and both those took off. So it was just like one thing after another. And I'm like, all right, I'll just keep on writing books. And I did get a deal with LMBPN with Michael Anderle. I co-wrote 4 books with him.
Oh, nice.
And my last book is Indie. I just did it myself.
Wow.
That's a journey.
That is a journey. That's quite the full circle, isn't it?
Hopefully it's not a circle. I want to keep going. You know?
Circles can overlap. They
That's
just get
true.
better and better and better.
I hope so. Yes, I hope so.
Wow, that's great. I'm curious with regards to police procedurals, like what do writers typically overlook or get wrong? I mean, I'm sure you answer that question quite a bit, but
I do. And, you know, with the conference thing, I'll just real quick. It's like, I didn't have a t-shirt on saying I was a cop. I was an unknown. Nobody knew me, but for some reason they knew I was a cop. So they'd come up to me and ask me questions like exactly what you just said, you know, and it was just a natural thing. They're very respectful, very kind. And it was just a natural thing. And that's where I'm like, okay, I should be writing crime fiction. I should be writing, you know, police procedurals for writers too. So in regards to your question, you know, there's so many things. I don't know how long we have, but boy, we could.
Okay, pick the top 2.
Okay.
Or else Angela won't get a question in.
All right. Well, let's start out with, you know, the lone wolf detective, you know, that shows up to a crime scene like a murder within seconds of this crime being committed. Yeah. It's a team effort, you know, and also there isn't just that one case they're working on. They juggle multiple cases. You know, there's all. You know, in Milwaukee, when I first started, it's a city of 600,000 people. There was probably about 230, 240 homicides and over 1,000 non-fatal shootings. So they had cases, you know, on top of their cases, on top of their cases. So, you know, and then of course, you know, they just show up. Usually homicide detectives will show up about an hour after, maybe later. The first people on a scene are the cops and the sergeant. They're the ones who actually do the initial stuff. And another thing that you see is no boss or a very indifferent boss. You know, Harry Bosch, you know, if everybody was TV's favorite detectives. Yeah, it starts out with him running down a dark alley after a bad guy. He winds up shooting and killing the guy. And we laugh at work. It's like suit and tie detectives don't run after anybody, man. That's unless you're in a gang unit or something, that ain't happening. And, you know, when that happens, there's a number of investigations that are going on, sometimes in tandem, sometimes separately. But best case scenario, you're back on the street in 3 months. Worst case that I've seen is a year. You're riding the pine. You're working inside. So, you know, Harry's giving, you know, Crate and Barrel Laker tickets. So they'd stay inside and he'd go out and take these different cases. And it's like, no. And his boss knew about it. His boss was like, okay, you go out there, you're fired. You're done. You know, so yeah. And then one more thing, guns. You know, they don't have unlimited ammunition. I just get a kick. You know, there's like a wheel gun and they shot like 30 times. I'm like, how did that happen? You know, that's some serious movie magic there. And how they handle a gun. One of the first things you learn is your trigger finger is often outside the trigger. Your finger is
Right.
never on that trigger until it's time to go boom. And I see
Right.
that being misrepresented so many times. And they're pointing guns at each other, these actors and stuff. It just, oh my God. Recoil, the gun doesn't fly, way up, and there's very little recoil to some of these guns, actually. And when somebody is shot, a lot of times, well, not a lot of times, almost every time, the body crumbles. It doesn't fly 50 yards after getting shot.
Right.
The
Yeah.
dramatic through the plate glass window where they're traveling, the length of a football field after getting shot with a 38. Like, no, that does not happen.
Yeah.
And some of the other stuff too, like DNA, getting the results in like 5 minutes from a
Sure.
DNA hit.
Yeah, and that's what I've wondered. I stopped watching NCIS because I could not picture that their crime lab functioned the way it did. Unless that's how it is, like they're playing loud music and sometimes making out in there. Or come on, I don't think you're just hanging out in the crime lab, right? Like that's a pretty serious sealed off place, isn't it?
Very much so. We have 2 state crime labs in Wisconsin. One was in Milwaukee, one's in Madison. And it takes a lot just to get into the building. It's very nondescript. There are cameras everywhere. It's very, very well protected. And you feel like you're going into a vault almost.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
not like
super,
you just
super
walk in
secure.
with coffee and be like, what's up, babe?
No. Yep,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
That does not happen.
Are there TV shows that have gotten it right, though? Because I think sometimes as writers, we watch TV and we read, but sometimes we write based on what we think we've seen on television shows. Is there a television show that has been more accurate?
I mentioned, like Hill Street Blues, the relationships between partners and, sometimes with the community, that's pretty spot on. The procedural stuff, no, not really. But the human emotions and the human element, I think they did that right. Let's see. Southland. I don't know if you've ever watched that.
Yeah.
That is almost 100% spot on. The only difference.
Good to know.
The only difference is all that stuff usually doesn't happen in one shift. Obviously you have to have lots of action to keep everything moving. Otherwise, it's like, I've been in a ton of car chases, but usually they last like 2 or 3 minutes. Sometimes longer.
Right.
And then usually they crash or they run out of gas or they give up. Then it's a foot chase, and that under a minute, maybe 2 or 3. And that's followed by like 6, 7, 8 hours of writing. There's a ton of reports. Obviously, that would be really boring in a book or a movie. It's like, okay, we got 5 minutes of action, then the rest, an hour and 50 minutes is going to be, this guy writing a report. No, that's not going to fly.
Interesting. I'm in the clinical side of my day job. So a lot of times they get hospitals wrong and ERs wrong and things like that. So I'm like nodding my head in agreement. But my question to you is, as an author who knows they have specific scenes or specific procedural things they need to look into and research on, how does one go about approaching someone in a current position in order to gather that research or interview them, or especially in a police office, that can be a little unnerving.
Yeah, it can be daunting. I get it.
Yeah. Like what would you propose people do in order to try to get that one-on-one time in research versus just Googling? Because I do think there's some authenticity in interviewing and talking to people. It's more tactile. And as authors, sometimes we need that.
Yeah, the best obviously is having a family member or friend who's a cop or was in law enforcement somehow, but that's not always going to happen. Some suggestions I would have for your listeners would be police citizen academies. A lot of different departments run those, and you can bend the ear of those instructors. Almost all those instructors are cops. And they're used to talking to people. Obviously, if they were picked to be in this citizen academy as an instructor, they're not going to be shy about talking to you. So that's a good one. Most departments, especially larger departments, have a PIO, a public information officer. You just, that should be on like their website or whatever. They're the liaison between the police department and usually the media, but it wouldn't hurt, say, hey, I'm an author. I'm working on this. I really want to get this right. I would
Yeah.
actually, I would say those words. I want to get this information right, because there's cops are going to have their walls up because there's so much gotcha journalism, that kind of stuff. And they're thinking they're
Sure.
being set up. So kind of break that down. Where I worked in Milwaukee, every district had a community liaison officer. They would go to community meetings, et cetera, et cetera. So depending where you live, the size of the department, if there's community meetings, yeah, I would suggest go to those. And then maybe afterwards, hey, could I
Great
bend your ear for a
idea.
couple of minutes and offer them a donut? I mean, hey, it can't hurt, right? Or see, yeah,
Some
here's the thing.
pastry. Yeah.
If you see a couple of cops attempting to have lunch, at a restaurant sitting down, which was kind of a luxury for us. I never sat down at a restaurant until I was on the job for almost 18 years, because at night we didn't have a chance and there was really nothing open. So that kind of really, that restricted us as far as that goes. But, buy them a cup of coffee, buy them, just, hey, can I bend your ear? I'm an author, et cetera. And you know what? Sometimes they might say, you know what, I'm too busy. I'm this, I'm that. I only have 20 minutes
Right.
for dinner. It's like, okay, well, here's my information. Here's my email address. If you don't mind, this would be great. And then another thing to think of is there's a lot of CCW courses out there, carrying concealed weapon. And a lot of those instructors are former law enforcement or active law enforcement. So you could take the course, get your license and not even consider carrying a gun. But I think everybody should have a very rudimentary understanding of guns. When I got married the second time to my now wife, I said, you're marrying a cop. I'm going to take you to a range, because she never even held a gun before. And I said, I'm going to show you how this works, because it's going to be in the house. You should know when it's safe. You should know when it's not safe. And that's what these courses teach you. So again, a CCW class, that's another resource. Use your imagination. And
I love that.
one more thing I would say, there's a lot of police procedurals, different books on Amazon. If they have an author, page or whatever, and a website, just cold email. I tell you what,
That's a great idea.
It's been a gold mine for me, as far as when I was brand new. I was listening to your episode about different tools and whatever. What I did was I looked for authors that were in my genre, that were selling well, that I like, say their covers. They're selling well. I really like their covers, but they're not, James Patterson or somebody that is unapproachable. Kind of like a mid-tier, that I'm like, okay, out of 10 emails, I got a couple back. And it's like, yeah, this is my cover designer. She's awesome. I'm like, wow, thank you. You don't even know who I am.
I love
Hey,
that.
do you mind if I ask you a few more questions? No, not at all. Then before you know it, you have
I
a little
totally
author
look
friend.
at the front of books when they say who the book cover artist is all the time, but that's just me.
Right.
But it's funny that you said that about your wife, because I grew up, my dad's a hunter, and he was always very careful about gun safety. And then I married my husband, who's ex-Army, and he was like, oh, we're going for the conceal license. And I never carry, but I've done it twice, because I was just like, I just don't want to be the girl who forgets and has an issue that I have to handle or anything. So I love those courses. I think it's really helpful. And it also, like I said, as an author, being tactile, and like I like to have visual things when I'm writing as well. I think those things are so important, because how can you really talk about the experience if you have no clue?
Very true.
This reminds me, though, of a trope in a lot of books. I see it in books, and I see it in TV shows and movies about the angry wife. And I just get tired of seeing, like, obviously, if you marry someone in law enforcement or military, I've seen it in thrillers where the woman is married to a Secret Service or CIA agent, and she's totally surprised or upset when there's a call in the middle of the night and, oh, you missed Tommy's 4th birthday party. And I'm like, is it really like that? Because I feel like if you're marrying into that life, you know what you're signing up for. They're probably not going to be around consistently all the time. And I get tired of like them saving the world and then coming home and their wife's like, you missed dinner again. And it's like, yeah, I stopped a terrorist threat. That bothers me because I just wish, I mean, I know it's hard for the spouses. I'm not saying it isn't a hard life. And I'm sure they're constantly worried if their spouse is going to come home, but being angry you missed the toddler's birthday, I'm so tired of that because I think women are stronger than that, you know? I don't know.
Yeah, I think there are other shows that represent it better. Like The Unit is really great when it comes to military wives and stuff. But like, I get what you're saying. But I also feel that way in fairy tales too. For the longest time, the females had to be rescued. And now there's a flip, right? And the females are saving themselves and possibly rescuing the guy nowadays. So I don't know. I think it's all cyclical and in our time event. I'm curious, Patrick, your thoughts on that though, because that is kind of this cliche you see quite a bit of these angry spouses.
Those cliches come from places, let me tell you.
They do.
I know,
don't they?
I know they do.
My first day in the academy, I forget who it was, is up at the podium. It's like, congratulations, you guys are now cops. And we're like, oh, cool, It says, okay, the divorce rate in this country is about 50%, give or take a little bit. All right, now you're cops. Now it's in the high 80s.
Wow, that's a huge jump.
Yep, and they said, if you're stupid enough to marry another cop, now it's in the 90s. Yeah, so we're all looking at each other like, oh, great. Is it too late to leave? Yeah, like, nah. But I think the true heroes in a lot of high-profile cases and such are the families. You never see what's going on with the families. And law enforcement is still traditionally a male-dominated profession, especially on the street. That's what I've seen through 25 years of being in law enforcement. And usually, most people are married and most people have kids. That's most, not all. And, there's a lot of strain there. Like you said, you're missing, little Johnny or Susie's birthday party. You feel like you're 2 inches tall because of this. It's horrible. But it's like, okay, I was working on this homicide. And, once the trail is hot, you stay on it. There's nothing more important. Unfortunately, everything else takes a back seat. And it's like, I remember one time, I was working on a homicide. I took a dying declaration and this guy in his last breaths told me to F off. And then he died. He was shot like, I don't know how many times. And he refused to tell us who shot him. It was all gang stuff. And we spent about trying to find this guy's killer. Everything else takes a back seat, including family life. So the real heroes they're not the cops or the special agent or the whatever. It's the wife or husband that's keeping everything under control at home. That ain't easy. And then if you really want to multiply it, I've interviewed DEA agents, CIA officers, and you're talking about packing up the family and going to a different country sometimes. You're leaving all your family and friends. You may not even know the language, but guess what? You're going. Or like say it's CIA, you might see dad 6 months from now because he's doing X, Y, or Z. So like I said before, the real heroes, I think, are the families, or the spouses, the children. They have to endure all that.
And I wish they were portrayed differently, because I think sometimes the wife comes off as so just bitching at her husband.
That was my ex-wife.
He has PTSD of you talking about it.
Which I can see the frustration, but at the same time, like, I wish there was a balance. Like, I understand the sacrifice that a military law enforcement wife has to go through, although you are signing up for a different life. You're not signing up for the same life your neighbor has where your husband's just mowing the lawn on the weekends. And it's, you've got to prepare yourself emotionally, but I also wish they weren't portrayed as just these bitchy women that don't understand that, because I'm sure there's some wives that just have to be strong. I wish that strength was portrayed more instead of just like, where were you? My chicken was cold.
That's time for you to write that, Angela.
Yeah, I know.
It's time for the writers to get that right.
Well, part of that too is like, I don't want to like be mean or cruel or, or whatever to my ex-wife. But I remember, we would be at family functions, we'd be doing whatever, and people are like, hey, do you have a cool story? Do you have a story? Or it's like, I can't believe you did X, Y, or Z. Or yeah, you went down a flight of stairs a couple days ago and your back is all screwed up, or you're hanging from a bridge, you saved some guy. My ex would look at this and says, I've got a tough job too. Nobody ever asked me about how my day was.
Right.
And she was completely unsupportive. You see like in movies and TV, you have the doting wife that's supporting their superstar. No, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes they're jealous, and it can cause some really hard feelings. When you sign up for it, it's nothing like you think it's going to be. It sounds like it's hey, you know what? I'm tough. I can handle this. This is going to be great, blah, blah, blah. Then reality kicks in. You have a screaming 6-month-old at home and your husband is at work. You got no break. You got no rest.
Yep.
So reality slaps you in the face hard. Oh yeah.
And I wish that was shown more, that side of it,
Yeah. And then the flip side of the coin is I worked nights for 17, 18 years. And with my first son, I worked midnight to 8. I'd pick him up from the sitters. I'd always work overtime. So I don't know, I get home 9, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, and I would watch him until my wife got home from work, which is 5, 6 o'clock at night.
Wow.
And he was, God bless him, he was Mr. Colic, Mr. I didn't want to take a nap, I didn't know anything about babies. I knew nothing about babies. And I'm like, what am I doing wrong? I got to be doing something wrong here. It was the most frustrating, just crazy time. And everybody's tempers are short. Everybody just, it's not like TV or in the movies. It can really suck.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think those are the cool things. I think that's the help in why research sometimes feels so daunting, because you can't necessarily find that information by Googling. And that's what stopped me. I had thrillers outlined, and we've talked about this, Patrick, but the research got so overwhelming that I just couldn't write or flow through it. And that's what because all these intricate things and stories, like I just didn't have that. And so I felt like I'm just kind of writing blind here. I didn't know where I was going, and I just stopped.
Yeah, but most people don't know exactly anyways. I think if you have a great character and a great story, that counts for so much. And you can fill in the blanks, as you go along.
Yeah, I had to learn that. And I had to just kind of let go and then write what I thought I knew. And then in editing, you can kind of work through like, this doesn't happen, or this happens more, or this is how they would think. So yeah, still on the dock once I get through some romance.
She's come over to the dark side with me.
Yeah, those are much easier to write. But although there's still romance, there's still romance in. I really do think romance between partners is so possible because you're with that person like 24/7 going through trauma, and I can't imagine.
Can a couple though be a partners on the force like that?
I've seen it happen many times. I've seen many a marriage break up because of that. Many.
Yeah.
It's not recommended, that's for sure. Yeah, sure. I've had my first partner on the job was a female, and I got along with her so well, but I was very unhappy at home. She was as well, but we both knew there was this like unspoken, it's like, no, hell no. We are not going to go down that road. We were both a little bit older. We were like in our early 30s, mid 30s. And I'm looking at these 21 and 22-year-old kids. I call them kids, if most of them were married when they got into the job, most of them were unmarried within about 5 or 6 years.
Wow.
And usually it was, maybe not a squad partner, but somebody on the shift, etc. The women that I worked with, they found their husbands at home. And I know this sounds terrible. They just weren't manly enough anymore or sexy enough anymore, because now you're working with these high speed guys that are presumably in good shape. And like you said before, you're going through these emotional times that draws you together. That kind of camaraderie is like nothing else. It's like super glue. It's amazing. And you can't get that with your husband that's the accountant or the banker or the whatever. And I mean, I remember I was talking to my partner about it, and she's like, I can't believe this stupid girl. And I'm like, what are you talking about, Patty? And she says, Yeah, she's talking about her. She's bored with her husband. And she's messing around with this guy that's on the SWAT team. And she's like, she sat her down and she said, when he's done with you, you're done. Don't leave your husband. Stop being stupid. And she's,
Mm,
oh, but my husband's so
Mm.
boring now. And he's so good looking. And he's this and he's that. And she said, no, stop it. You're being dumb. And of course,
yeah.
she didn't listen. And of course, she left her husband. And of course, 6 months later, the boyfriend dropped
Yeah.
Wow.
her. So
Yeah.
that is not uncommon.
Yeah. That gives me an idea for a story. No, stop it. Okay. But wait, your partner was Patty? So
Yeah,
Pat?
I was
Patty?
Pat and she was Patty.
That's awesome.
That's a whole
Yes.
other story now. Like,
I
Yeah.
have friends that she's married. When they were married, it was Kelly and Kelly. And I was like, oh my
boy.
gosh, are you going to hyphenate your name? And she said no. And I was just like, this is really difficult. But yeah, that's wild. Pat and Patty. I love it.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's, I don't know.
We're
But
still besties.
I mean,
We're still good friends.
That's
good,
good.
good. Yeah, I wonder how different it is. It's got to be so different for a woman to like prove herself out there than it is for the male colleagues. I mean,
It
it's
can
just sort of
be,
like, yeah.
and I had a bird's eye view because my partner was female and we worked in one of the worst areas of the city. So every squad was a 2-person car. In a lot of police departments, there's just one person in a squad car. They don't have a partner,
Right.
which is really unfortunate because I tell you what, it's not just the physical stuff, it's the emotional stuff too. It's so nice, it's like, yeah, I had a fight with my wife today. Okay, what'd you do wrong? And I'm like, all right, here we go. It's like, but I got
I
the
love
female
it.
perspective because, I was with her all the time. I spent more time with her than I did my wife and kids because we were
Yeah.
working all the time.
Right.
So it gave me a front row to see what this was actually like.
And what was it like for her, though? What help our listeners like understand
Well,
the difference
she
a little bit?
family came before anything for her. Her kids were her life. And I don't know how she did it. When we were both, sleep deprived, she would get done with work at 8 o'clock in the morning. If there was overtime, I would take it. Because the reason being is she was married to a cop that worked from 11 in the morning till 7 p.m. So she would run home, go to bed, then wake up like at 10:30 and then take the kids. He would go to work. He'd get home around 7:30, 8 o'clock, and then she'd go back to bed and sleep for a couple hours. That was her life because she refused to send her kids to daycare. She said, I'm raising my kids.
Right.
So, she would laugh at other female cops that overdid it. Like we had one gal, I don't know if you remember the police show, I think it was Policewoman, Angie Dickinson.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And her name was Pepper. They called her Pepper on the show.
Yeah.
So we had one
Yeah.
female cop that was always overdoing it, always just overcompensating. So Patty started calling her Pepper. Oh,
Wow. Wow.
you can still be a woman and still do this job. You don't have to
Yeah.
overdo it. Because her mouth got me into more fights than you can ever imagine. She can make Mother Teresa a fighter. She can make Gandhi a fighter. And I'm like, come on,
Yeah.
stop it.
Oh, it's interesting. Have you seen it's been out for a couple of years now, but The Rookie, they have more female like detectives and cops than I've seen in the past too on that particular show.
I haven't really watched that show all that much because
Yeah.
it was just so hokey. My skin started crawling and I'm just like,
Oh,
no,
boy.
I can't do this.
I love
just can't
Nathan
do this.
Fillion. Sorry.
Yeah,
I'm
we
going to
love
watch
him.
everything
Yeah.
he's in.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that.
But I was
Cassie,
curious.
you have one more good question about the tech piece. I think.
Yeah, so I was curious because I'm a techie person, but so
Sure.
many things have changed in technology. So I was just curious, are there recent changes in law enforcement that could influence storytelling as a result of the technology boom? Per forensic tools or even like body cameras, you see that more readily. And a lot of the technology that's being implemented in the various police forces, mostly I think in more dense cities. But I was just curious, does that change or influence how someone should do their storytelling with
Yes,
the changes in technology?
definitely as far as like time period goes and
Sure.
location and department, we all have kind of our own shtick. On the east coast, like in New York and Boston, they're police precincts. Where on the west coast in LA, there were divisions. In Chicago and Milwaukee, they were police districts. In Chicago, it's a
Sure.
star. It's if you say badge, they'll slap you across the face. The only people that wear badges are firefighters. So for me, it was a badge. On the East Coast, it's a shield. Same thing with technology. If you're writing a story about 1995 Milwaukee, we hand wrote all of our reports. The only computer was in the office that you were running somebody, and it was the dot matrix printers. Yeah. So beware of that. Be cognizant of when your story is taking place. Also, DNA is a game changer. That wasn't around. I mean, it was kind of when I first started, but boy, that is a game changer. But in order to get a hit on DNA, you have to have somebody that has DNA in the system. So it just same thing with fingerprints. It's like, okay, I'm going to get a fingerprint. Good for you. If that person has never been arrested or held like a city license, like a bartender or something like that, then it's not the end all be all. It's a great thing to have,
right.
But that's that, unless you use familial DNA, that's a different beast altogether as well. So you have to be cognizant of the time period and the department itself. Some departments were a lot more high speed than we were. And it all comes down to city budgets. Public safety is usually schools are number one and public safety is number two. So I'm driving around in a squad car with bald tires and no brakes. The last thing we're worrying about is a computer in the district station or in a car for that matter. When I started, there was no cameras. There was no body cameras. There was no squad cameras. There was no cameras in the district station. None of them. Wow. When you interviewed somebody, you might use a tape recorder, a literal like cassette tape recorder.
Yeah.
Wow. But things have changed so much. I'm thinking to myself for the future and maybe not so distant future, look at AI. How is that going to be integrated into police work? That's all new territory. Who knows what's going to happen? Is a DA going to take a look at a case that they're reviewing, put it into some AI software, and it's like, well, you have a 40% chance of winning this in a jury trial. All right, pass. I'm not going to charge that person.
That's interesting. Yeah.
There's, or, you
they're
have
using AI now in publishing too. With submissions, agents can say what they're looking for. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I did not know that. I
went to a little class on that and I was kind of shocked. I was like, wow, that gets through a slush pile though really fast.
Yeah. I don't think people consider city budgets and what the police, have money allocated to them, because some shows I've watched, it's like the smallest, even Hawaii 5-0, the new Hawaii 5-0, and they had like all this tech. I did love that show, but they had that's a very small, and they had that thing where they could pull things and it was like sci-fi tech level. And I'm like, really? That must cost how much money?
Besides a whiteboard.
Right.
Yeah. We didn't get whiteboards till the end of my career. I mean, it's like none of that stuff. But, it's funny you say that about Hawaii 5-0. I remember the first time seeing that. I was watching it with my wife and I'm just like, this is so ridiculous. This is absolutely laughable. I'm like, wow, my gosh, it blew my mind how silly it actually was. I don't know how these actors keep a straight face. I really don't.
Right. But I guess a takeaway though is there is a balance between how much do we have to get everything right or just enough, because it still is fiction. I mean,
correct.
Like I said before, you're the big things right.
You were talking about The Rookie, Cassie. It's like you like the actor. That's how
I
a
do.
lot of us watch TV. I really like this one actor or actress. I like this story. It's original. It's going somewhere. The writing is super crisp and it keeps me engaged. Same thing with a good book. It's like, okay, this story is awesome. I want to see what happens to this character. And sometimes the other stuff kind of goes off to the side.
Yeah, and I kind of followed him because I loved Castle. And I was so upset when it got canceled and I wasn't happy with the ending. And then The Rookie came and I was like, this is my new Castle. Not quite. It's not the same by any stretch, because I love the idea of the writer, right? Being in with the police like that would never happen. But I thought, how fun is that? And there's also that suspension of disbelief. Like, how fictionalized do you want your story? Do you want it such that you are, intimately more realistic or more fantasy, and you buy into that fantasy, right? So
Yeah,
I think you have to decide that too.
absolutely.
Well, this has been so amazing. I mean, I have like 500 more questions, so we'll just have to have you on again.
Yeah, thanks,
I would
Kat,
love
for
to.
coming on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but before we get to our table talk, I think I just want you to tell listeners how it came about that you were featured in the Wall Street Journal, because that was huge. How did that
Yeah,
happen? You were just,
knocked me over with a feather. I thought somebody was pranking me. I really did. And I'm like, I get an email. But first, I'll back up. I was, I have the Facebook group Cops and Writers, and it's mostly writers and it's law enforcement that answer questions for people. And I vet everybody that comes in. I'm very careful. I'm like a overprotective
good.
mom. I just want to make
Good.
sure it's a safe place, and it can be very predatory. Anything with writing, it's like, hey, give me $10,000 and I'll make, you'll be on the New York Times, blah, blah, blah. I'll do it. Ugh, that makes my skin crawl. So I make sure that everything is copacetic. So I get a request to join the group from some guy, and I always look to see what they do for a living, how long they've been on Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. Investigative reporter for Wall Street Journal. And I'm like, okay. That's odd. There's a red flag there, but yeah, come on down. Come on in, Jeff. So I was going to email him. I found him. I found his work email, and I'm like, well, give it a couple days. I'm going to email him. Well, the next day he emails me. He says, hey, a friend of mine that's a writer told me about your group. I'd really like to talk to you about it. And I'm like, sure. And I'm thinking to myself, is this a joke? And I could hear him typing as we're talking. And I'm like, okay, this guy's real. Yeah, he is a reporter. And I said, well, he said, I'm really busy right now. Could I talk to you next week? Absolutely. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. So the next day I'm in the gym, I'm working out, and my phone rings and it's him. And I'm like, okay. Now, before any kind of interview, I prepare myself. I have all my ducks in a row. Even if you don't know the questions, like there's some basic ones that people are going to ask you. And I like to have everything in front of me. I'm all squared away, ready to go. And he starts interviewing me, and I'm like, he interviewed me for over an hour at the gym on my phone. And I'm just like, I wasn't ready for this at all, but I can think on my feet. Then he interviewed me again for about a half hour the next week. He said, I'm pitching this idea to my editor. He said, there's lots of editors this has to go through. And I'm like, okay. So I thought to myself, whatever. It was an hour and a half out of my life. It's not the end of the world. Then before I know it, he's like, okay, it made it through this editor. And he says, I'm trying to get you on page 1. He said, Thursday, you're going to be on the cover of the Wall Street Journal. Down towards the bottom, all the important stuff is towards the top. And I'm like, I get that. He emailed me, sorry, something popped up. I'm like, okay. There I am on Friday. And then he put me in the weekend edition. And I was just like, holy cow. So that's how all that happened.
Amazing.
That's
It was
so
awesome.
great.
That is
I need to
great.
get a signed copy of that somehow. Okay, that's my newest mission. All right. So this is actually a really fitting one for this episode. Okay. Have you ever been conned? Have you ever had a con pull on you?
Ooh, a con.
Have you ever been conned
At work?
anywhere in your life?
Anywhere in my life. I mean, I think we all have. To what pops out into my head, and it was really embarrassing, but I don't mind embarrassing myself. A couple of my cops stopped there's like an 18 and a 19-year-old kids, I call them kids or adults, at a bus stop. There was some kind of domestic thing where one guy was supposedly trying to run over his girlfriend, and his car was like wound up on this girlfriend's front yard, blah, blah, blah. So he's just sitting there. And it's me and 2 of my cops. And one of the cops went inside the car to run them. She went in and used her squad computer. And I'm like, and one kid, man, he was squirrely as heck. And I'm like, there's something wrong with him. So my spidey senses were kind of tingling. I said, stand up. I said, I'm going to hook you up. I said, these handcuffs come off just as easy as they go on. I said, he was cooperative, but I felt resistive tension, which means you kind of cinch up and your muscles get tight. And I'm like, something's going on here. I'm like, all right. So we're just waiting for the results of their wanted checks to come back. And, the other officers getting the story what happened between this one guy and his girlfriend, blah, blah, blah. I'm just there for security. And the one guy that was really squirrely looked at me and says, we're by a car dealership. There's a bus stop and then there's a car dealership. He says, oh man, look at that car. So I look, I turn my head, he's gone. I'm like, oh, I can't
My
believe I'm that
gosh.
dumb. So that was the
Oh,
ultimate
no.
con. He's running like an Olympic track athlete with, he's wearing gym shorts and a t-shirt and tennis shoes. And I've got 30 pounds of, stuff on. He's 18 years old. I'm 55. And I'm like, I ran after this kid for half a mile because I'm like, I'm not going to let you get away with my handcuffs on you. And he was handcuffed behind his back. He was running like a jackrabbit.
Whoa.
So I'm like,
Wow.
I felt so
That was the
stupid.
ultimate made you look. Wow.
Oh my
Yes.
gosh.
So that was the con that I had. And it wound up being great because he was wanted for bank robbery. He held up a bank a week beforehand.
Oh my gosh.
So that's why he was
Wow.
running.
Oh my gosh.
Cassie, when
Okay,
have you
so
been
mine
caught?
isn't half as exciting, but it's
Yeah.
funny. So my youngest daughter, I think she was 10 or 12, and I'd gotten her first cell phone. And I had a rule that she could not go to bed with her cell phone because she would play on it, like they just don't go to sleep. And I would make her put it in our kitchen that has like a little desk area. I would see it at night. Well, of course, it was the phone holder. And one night, my oldest daughter looked at it. I would just generally scan it. No big deal. And my oldest daughter looked at it and touched it and moved it. There was a piece of paper she had colored to look like her phone and put it in the case and was putting it on the desk while she was in bed, just going to town.
Oh my gosh.
That had been going
That's
on for like
awesome.
a week. And all I could do was bust out laughing because I wasn't doing my due diligence of actually picking it up and knowing. And needless to say, that had been a hilarious con in my
That's good.
house. She got
I
a
like
little
that.
in trouble. The phone got taken away. And of course, that was dramatic. And from then on, I was touching items. I wasn't just casually glancing anymore. Yeah, that was the big con.
Well, mine actually should be a Netflix special if I ever get my hands on this man. Because, and this is why I should have been a detective. So, and it's hilarious because it has to do with pickleball. It was a pickleball Ponzi scheme.
Really?
Oh
So
my
this
gosh.
man named Brett Thomas, which I don't think that was his real name because I Googled him, and someone without a search history, I think that's a red flag. There was nothing about this man anywhere. And so you can Google any of us who are not celebrities. We have a Google search history. Anyway, so he had this pickleball facility in Laguna Beach, and he met through playing pickleball a group of us out here in Colorado, and he wanted to go across this country and open these like indoor pickleball facilities with food and merch and whatever. So my husband and I got wrangled into this, and he wanted to hire us to do the merchandising. But when I would ask him specific questions like, okay, well, you're going to hire me to be your buyer. How much are you paying me? And he's like he couldn't answer specifics about anything. So then long story short, I kept asking questions like, he said he had a whole team of people working for him and he needed $250,000 of our money to open the facility. So we gave that to him, but then all of a sudden the architect wasn't being paid, the skying guy wasn't being paid, things weren't happening. And I said to him, this is a scam. I bet you he's paying the bills at the Laguna Beach with our money and he's courting someone in St. Louis trying to get them so he can fund this. And I started doing some digging on his Facebook page. I tracked down his ex-wife.
You are a detective. Look at you.
Yeah, I did. I found her with just her first name. And apparently he faked cancer in California to get donations to open the Laguna Beach thing.
Is that low? Oh my God.
And he's out there. I want this to go on Netflix. He is running wild, still doing these things, but he changed his name, I think, and that's why we can't find him anymore. But the second we were on to him, he started to bring up the cancer thing. Like he thinks he has a cancer diagnosis and they won't let him fly anymore. So we couldn't get back out to us.
Okay, that's not a thing.
Nope, it's
Right.
not.
He didn't have cancer. Yeah. And that's not a thing. That's not something, but he kept faking illnesses, which is what these con artists do when they start to get. So all of us lost all that money. It's gone.
Oh.
It's in the wind. There was
That
like
is-
10 people involved to put up different money to be a part of this whole business.
Did you
And
call the police?
No.
You should
Why
have.
wouldn't you?
How would you prove it? Like,
You wouldn't have
I had
to.
all
You
this,
could
Yeah,
probably
like-
get lawyers and take over
Absolutely.
the Laguna.
Yeah.
I would have
Sue
called
him
the cops.
for
and it's-
damages.
I don't think
I
it's
wanted
too
to.
late.
I wanted to get this guy, but so many of these other people, I was like, this is justice. And I said, it's not about us. He's doing this to other people who are probably going to lose their shirts.
He's gonna keep
Giving
doing
money
it
to-
until he gets caught. He's gonna keep doing
Yeah.
it.
I think what he does is he borrows just enough under or something that it's like he found a loophole that I looked up, but I found a lien online. I was like hard detective mode. I found a lien from someone else who had wanted money because he wasn't paying bills at the Laguna Beach thing. But he changed his name. Now I don't know where he is. But someday I'm going to be on Netflix with this
Okay.
because it
You
has to do
should.
with pickleball. How funny is that? Like, it's a Ponzi scheme.
Wow.
Anyway, so that's my
Oh my gosh. That's
That's
crazy.
why, yeah. But anyway, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Don't forget to give us a review and rating wherever you listen to the podcast. It really helps us with visibility. Next week, new month. Since we are headed into summer, we're going to tackle some hot topics because it's getting hot out there. So until then, keep writing, keep doing. We'll see ya.
Thanks for joining today's episode of The Author Next Door. Be sure to like, follow, and tell us your thoughts of this week's episode. Angela and Cassie would love to hear from you.